The moment I found out my sister was using my debit card to fund a luxury getaway with my boyfriend, I felt my entire world tilt on its axis. My phone buzzed with unfamiliar payment alerts, each more outrageous than the last. First a flight, then a spa package, then a foreign hotel reservation. My stomach clenched so hard I thought I might retch. This was no small theft. It was a deliberate, deeply personal betrayal. I still remember standing there, phone in hand, heart hammering as I pieced together what was happening. By the time I confirmed my card was missing, outrage roared through me. She had crossed a line, and so had he, and they both needed to learn exactly how fury felt once unleashed. I had never imagined my sister capable of something like this. We'd always been different. She was the risk-taker, the carefree extrovert, while I was quiet and measured. We argued plenty growing up, but we still shared a certain loyalty. We might have sniped at each other about boyfriends or clothes or who got to borrow the car, but we also cheered each other on. I never suspected she would do anything so extreme as to snatch my bank card. Maybe that's why it shook me so badly. Until the day of that suspicious charge, I still believed she had a moral compass, a line she wouldn't cross. As for my boyfriend, well, I'd started to notice something off in his behavior a few weeks earlier. He seemed distant, glued to his phone, disappearing for hours at odd times. I asked if something was wrong and he brushed me aside, muttering that work had become hectic. At first I believed him. He'd never given me reason to doubt him, and I preferred trust over suspicion. But a nagging feeling wouldn't let go, especially since I once caught a glimpse of a message preview from someone named Allie. I asked who it was, and he claimed it was a coworker. I let it drop. Now it all came rushing back, each red flag I'd ignored flapping furiously in my mind. I stared in disbelief at the transactions. They painted a clear picture: an outbound flight to a tropical island, a deposit on a fancy beachfront villa, reservations for a high-end restaurant near the water. My throat went dry reading the notes attached to the hotel booking. Romance package includes couples massage. The knowledge that my sister was the one traveling with him left me reeling. A part of me couldn't accept it. I called her phone, straight to voicemail. I tried texting her, demanding an explanation. She didn't reply. I phoned him too and he ignored the calls. They'd both vanished into radio silence while draining my account. I froze the card on my bank's mobile app, my hands trembling. There were still funds left in my savings, but the amounts they'd already spent made me feel nauseated. I sat down in my living room, phone clutched tight, struggling to make sense of a reality that felt like a bad dream. My sister's repeated money troubles flitted through my mind. She'd borrowed from me before, smaller amounts to pay off bills or buy groceries. But that was always with my consent. She joked about wanting a fancy vacation, but I never thought she'd stoop to stealing my card. And to top it off, she was going with my own boyfriend? I needed immediate answers, so I drove to my parents' house that afternoon. They were baffled when I showed up, demanding if they knew where my sister was, but I told them only that she'd done something huge. My father tried calling her. No response. My mother's worry kicked in. She asked me if I was okay, but I could barely talk. The betrayal burned too hot for me to hold a calm conversation. I left with no leads, my parents peppering me with questions I refused to answer. They wanted more details, but I was too angry and embarrassed to elaborate. All I told them was that my sister had taken something from me and vanished. I went back home, locked the door, and cried into my pillow for a good hour. There was heartbreak, but also a rising fury. How dare they do this to me? What kind of twisted scheme was it? My mind conjured images of them laughing, toasting each other with cocktails by the beach, using my money. I refused to be a passive victim. If they thought they could get away with this, they were sorely mistaken. First, I contacted my bank's fraud department. They confirmed the charges were recent. Since I'd already blocked the card, there would be no further transactions, but the existing reservations were already partially paid for. They gave me the details: flight to an island departing in 2 days, the resort booking for a week. My card had covered the deposit, and presumably my sister or boyfriend planned on using it for the remaining balance upon check-in. I felt a grim satisfaction imagining them stuck at the hotel desk with a useless card. But that wasn't enough. I called the airline to confirm the reservation. The representative verified seats were under my boyfriend's name and my sister's name. Her legal name, no alias. I gave the airline a heads up that the card was stolen. The agent noted it, though they couldn't outright cancel the tickets unless I'd purchased them. The deposit was non-refundable, so they were still free to fly, but they'd have no easy way to pay for the rest of the trip once they landed. With the airline and resort at least aware of the fraud, I felt slightly better. But I still wanted to confront them. I left furious voicemails on both their phones, my voice shaking. Then, as if responding to my fury, my boyfriend texted me a short message. "I'll explain soon. Don't do anything drastic." I stared at the words, my stomach churning. How dare he? The gall of telling me not to do anything drastic when he was halfway to scamming me with my own sibling. Days passed without further contact. I stewed in my anger, fielding calls from my confused parents. They said my sister had called them in tears, refusing to explain why she was crying, just that I'd turned on her. My mother pleaded with me to fix whatever was wrong, but I brushed her off. I felt no obligation to cloak my sister's crime. If she wanted to spin a sob story, let her. She was the one who needed to come clean, not me. Meanwhile, I braced for the day they would attempt to board the plane. I wondered if I should show up at the airport just to watch them squirm. It was a thought that gave me a vicious sort of glee. But that night my phone rang. It was my sister. Her voice was a tense whisper, as though she was hiding from someone. She said, "Look, can we talk?" My pulse kicked up. I demanded to know if she'd stolen my card. There was a shaky pause. She muttered, "I'm sorry, I didn't plan it like this. It just happened." She sounded half apologetic, half defensive. She tried to blame it on the fact that she had no money, no hope, and needed a break from her problems. According to her, my boyfriend had offered to help arrange a trip for them. She claimed it was a spur-of-the-moment thing that spiraled out of control. I found myself shouting into the phone, "Spur of the moment? That's not an excuse for theft and betrayal." She pleaded with me, insisting she was in love with him and that they hadn't meant to hurt me. My mind reeled. Well, my sister and my boyfriend? My anger spiked so high that my face felt hot. "If you cared one iota about me," I yelled, "you wouldn't do this behind my back and use my card." She tried to say something else, but I ended the call near tears. That night I barely slept. My mind kept replaying all our sibling memories, the time we built pillow forts, the secrets we shared as kids, and overlaying them with her voice calmly admitting that she used me. The next day my parents tried to intervene, urging me to meet them for a family discussion, to figure out why Alyssa was so desperate. I refused. I was done with her sob stories. Instead, I decided I needed closure in my own way. I found out the exact flight time from the airline's text updates. They kept messaging me to confirm the transaction dispute. The flight was leaving around 9 p.m. from the local airport. On an impulse, I drove there after work, parked, and entered the bustling terminal. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me. It felt surreal, hunting for my sister and boyfriend among throngs of travelers. It only took me 15 minutes of roaming the check-in area to spot them. They were standing off to one side, looking tense, apparently mid-argument. I walked straight toward them. My sister's eyes widened in horror as she recognized me. My boyfriend, X at this point, looked startled, then tried to step forward as if to placate me. "Hey, let's talk about this," he began. I snapped. "You want to talk now, in the middle of the airport?" My sister tugged at his sleeve, clearly uncomfortable. "Can we please do this elsewhere?" she whispered. But I wasn't leaving. Not without letting them see exactly how furious I was. I demanded an explanation. They both stammered nonsense about how they were sorry, how it wasn't supposed to happen this way. I retorted that the bank was reversing the charges, and the resort and airline were alerted to the fraud. Their grand romantic getaway was ruined. My sister's face paled, tears welling in her eyes as she realized I'd effectively blocked their entire plan. My boyfriend cursed under his breath, glaring at me like I was the villain. "You didn't have to sabotage us," he hissed. I shook my head, an incredulous laugh escaping. "Sabotage you? You literally stole from me, hooking up behind my back. What did you expect me to do? Wish you a happy honeymoon?" A few onlookers were glancing over, sensing drama. My sister tried to hush me, saying I was causing a scene. That only spurred me on. "A scene? You stole my card for your affair. You think I care about a scene now?" She let out a choked sob, apologizing, saying she'd pay me back. My boyfriend insisted it was all a misunderstanding. I could barely believe the gall. "If you're so in love," I told them icily, "go ahead and buy the tickets yourselves." "Oh wait, neither of you can afford it." "Not my problem." I turned and stormed away, leaving them in the swirl of airport chaos. My heart pounded so hard it echoed in my ears. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I held them back until I reached the parking garage, where I allowed myself a jagged sob. Part of me felt a savage satisfaction that I'd publicly confronted them, but another part felt hollow. This was my sister after all, and the man I once thought I loved. Knowing they were both liars left a stinging ache. Back home, I collapsed on my couch, replaying the confrontation. I half expected them to chase me, but they didn't. Probably they scurried off to salvage what they could, or maybe they separated. Either way, I'd made my stance clear. That evening, I got a string of texts from my sister's number. "Please talk to me. I'm sorry. I know you hate me. I get it. But we can fix this. Marcus is furious you canceled everything. He blames me. I don't know what to do." I stared at the messages, my anger flaring anew. She wanted pity? She wanted me to hold her hand through the consequences of her betrayal? I put my phone on silent. By morning, there were more texts from my mother saying my sister was hysterical, that my father was furious at the both of us. She demanded I come over and resolve this. I decided enough was enough. My family needed the truth. If they didn't already see it, I'd tell them plainly. So I went to my parents' home the following evening, ignoring my sister's presence. My mother greeted me, eyes red from crying. My father looked stern. My sister sat on the sofa, head bowed. I walked in with a cold sense of purpose. "Mom, Dad, your beloved older daughter used my debit card to fund a trip with my boyfriend. She basically drained my account. That's why I've been distant. That's why I'm done with her." My mother gasped, my father's eyes flared with anger. My sister tried to defend herself, babbling that she'd pay me back once she had the money. My father demanded to know if this was true. She finally admitted it, tears streaming down her cheeks. My mother turned on her, shouting about how unforgivable this was, how she never raised her to be a thief. My sister sobbed, repeating that she was desperate, that Marcus convinced her it was just a short-term plan. My father looked like he might explode. I felt numb watching my sister face the wrath she deserved. Still, the sight of her crying cracked something in me. She looked genuinely broken. But I forced myself to remember how she orchestrated the entire fiasco. My parents tried to get me to accept her apologies, to promise I wouldn't let this ruin our family. I let out a shaky breath. "I'm not pressing charges if that's what you're worried about. But she's not welcome around me. She betrayed me on a level I can't just shrug off. Don't ask me to forgive her overnight." My sister whimpered, begging me to let her fix it. She said she'd find a job, pay me back in full, prove she was still my sister. I stared at her tear-streaked face, torn between hatred and the memory of us as kids. Finally, I managed to say, "If you're truly sorry, you'll do the work. But don't expect me to open my arms right now." I left them in that tension, ignoring my mother's pleas to wait. Enough drama for one night. The next days were quiet. My sister texted me a long apology saying she was cutting ties with Marcus, that she realized how toxic the situation was. She even sent me a partial deposit from a small paycheck she had, a gesture to show she wanted to repay me. I didn't respond. I appreciated the attempt, but the betrayal was still fresh. As for Marcus, he tried calling me once, but I rejected it. He left a voicemail, some rambling about how we should talk, that I was blowing things out of proportion. Hearing his self-serving tone made me seethe. I deleted the message, blocked his number, resolved never to speak to him again. I changed the locks on my apartment just in case, determined to keep that toxicity out of my life. Time passed and the rawness gradually dulled. The bank reversed the fraudulent charges. My finances stabilized, though I felt paranoid checking my statements daily for months afterward. I realized I had to fill the emotional void. I turned to close friends who listened with sympathy and righteous indignation. They reminded me I deserved better from both a boyfriend and a sister. That reassurance helped me push through the waves of hurt. Eventually, my sister found a new job, and I heard from our mother that she was living more modestly, struggling to make ends meet, but apparently staying on the right side of the law. I also heard Marcus had vanished from her life. It seemed their grand fling couldn't survive the fiasco of the cancelled trip. I felt a surge of satisfaction at the thought of them separated, both paying for their betrayals. But there was also a sad undertone. This entire fiasco had changed how I viewed my family. My parents tried to be neutral, but I knew my father deeply resented my sister's actions. My mother was caught in the middle, wanting us to reconcile. As for me, I kept my distance. It took nearly a year before my sister managed to repay most of the deposit. She set up a monthly transfer to my account, a small sum that chipped away at the debt. I never told her thank you. I just let her do it. Over time, I recognized that she was trying to show genuine remorse. She asked me to meet her for coffee to talk. The first time I agreed, I sat across from her in a cafe, arms folded, letting her speak. She apologized again, more sincerely than before. She admitted she'd been jealous of my stability, that she always felt overshadowed by my achievements. When Marcus started flirting, she was flattered, and the idea of a secret trip gave her a rush. She claimed it was never about hurting me, more about chasing excitement. I told her that was the worst excuse I'd ever heard. but I saw tears in her eyes when she nodded, acknowledging how hollow it sounded. We sat there in heavy silence before she promised, "I won't ask for forgiveness yet. I know I broke your trust, but I'm not giving up on trying to make amends." Her voice wobbled with emotion and something in me softened. She was still my sister for better or worse. I said, "I'll keep my heart guarded, but I won't slam the door entirely. Prove with time you've changed, that you can be better." She teared up again, nodding. We parted with the faintest sense of a new beginning. In the end, the fiasco tested my boundaries, my family's unity, and my own ability to defend myself. My sister's theft taught me not to ignore suspicious behavior just because it comes from someone I love. My boyfriend's complicity reminded me how easily betrayal can hide behind a facade of affection. The heartbreak was brutal, but it forced me to stand up for myself. By blocking that debit card and alerting the resort and airline, I spoiled their unethical escapade. They had nowhere to run, no easy payoff. In that small act, I reclaimed my power, and recognized that no matter how someone tries to sabotage or use me, I have a right to protect myself. Looking back, I often wonder if there were clues I should have caught earlier. Maybe so. But dwelling on it forever won't help. I prefer to see it as a lesson in resilience. My sister and I are on tentative speaking terms now. She still tries to be extra polite, treading carefully, aware one misstep might push me away for good. I remain cautious, though a glimmer of sisterly affection endures. As for Marcus, he's a ghost of the past, a reminder that love without loyalty is meaningless. Sometimes, late at night, I replay the memory of those frantic notifications that first alerted me to the stolen card. That initial rush of shock and heartbreak could have overwhelmed me. Instead, I turned it into determination. Stepping into that airport, confronting them, blocking every route they had to a blissful getaway, it was messy, but it was also the moment I proved that people can't just walk all over me. In a twisted way, I'm grateful for the clarity it provided. I learned to trust my instincts, to defend my boundaries, and never to let someone else define my worth. So that's the story of how my sister stole my debit card for a dream trip with my boyfriend, and how I shut it all down in a single phone call to the bank, a couple of conversations with the airline and resort, and one unforgettable confrontation at the airport. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, more of a cautionary tale about loyalty, envy, and the painful ways we can hurt each other when we forget the bonds that matter. But at least I emerged stronger, and perhaps in time she'll learn from her mistakes and build a more honest life. As for me, I've already moved on, card safely in my wallet, heart a little scarred but wiser for it.